Hello again, everybody, and welcome to Tiger Sidelines right here on MC2 alongside Gabe DeArmond of PowerMizzou.com and the St. Louis Post-Dispatch's Dave Matter. I'm Bo Bayman. Thanks, as always, for joining us, and I hope you guys enjoyed your trip to the Music City Bowl. It was quite an experience. The last time we were on after a week off for the holidays, we were getting ready for that game, not knowing if it would be played. Of course, it wasn't played, so the Tigers end 5-5 after the COVID cancellation of the bowl game. And Dave, not surprising really that bowl game was called off.
It wasn't. I think we kind of had that vibe when we, for one, when the game was announced, and then when we discussed it on the last show. But at that time, it seemed more like Iowa would maybe be the team that would have to pull out because they were the ones that had to stop all their team activities for a week. And then a week later, it was Missouri that had to do the same. So not a surprise. I mean, there were several bowl games that I think there was 3 or 4 in the SEC alone, or that involved an SEC team that had to do the same thing. I guess it's a shame. I don't think those players were probably all that disappointed, or Eli Drinkwitz. I mean, it was the biggest point spread of any team, any game involving an SEC team. Who knows how it would have, unfolded, but I guess 5-5 is better than 5-6. So they were able to move into the off season and just kind of get moving ahead to next year, and didn't have to go to Nashville.
And let's be honest, Gabe, 5-5 looks way better than 5-6 with the 3-game losing streak.
Yeah, it just doesn't mean that much in the end. I know it means more, but only if you're in the playoff. Those other games just didn't mean that much. I think Missouri was ready for this season to be over. The way Eli Drinkwitz sounded and looked in those last 2 press conferences, I don't think he was heartbroken about it. And there was some fans that were upset, but I think we've talked about this before. Like, we kind of underrate what these players went through this season, and not so much the coaches. They get to go home and see their families every night and all that. But the players went through a lot to make this season happen. Along those lines, I just saw some of the protocols that are going to be in place for these teams in the NCAA tournament. I mean, these kids deserve a lot of credit for what we're putting them through to entertain us and to allow us to have jobs and things to talk and write about.
Yeah, no doubt. And now, as a result of the season being over, the main thing we've talked about up until about yesterday was just the roster turnover. Who's coming, who's leaving. Some people have transferred. Before we get to a new defensive coordinator needed, there were a lot of guys who said, let's run it back. There were others like Nick Bolton, who wasn't even going to play in the bowl game, said, hey, I'm out of here. So it's been kind of an interesting follow the last couple of weeks to see who's coming back and who's not.
Yeah, I think it says a lot about, what they're kind of building here, that so many of these seniors have decided to come back for another senior year. It also says something about their NFL draft stock. If those guys were told they were definitely going to be picked in the first or second round, well, then they're preparing for the draft like Nick Bolton is. But those scholarships don't count toward the maximum next year. So it doesn't really cost Missouri a whole lot to have them around, and you need the depth. We saw that this year. Now you can maybe hope that there's not a pandemic going on next year, and contact tracing is not something we're talking about every week. But to have some extra guys back along the offensive and defensive line, to bring your center back, Mike Maietti, I think is huge for this team. Kiki Chisholm, he was not an all SEC receiver, but he was their leading receiver. So to have him back in a year where you really need to build up some playmakers on the outside, that's good to have back. There's no downside to that at all.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And then the other big news is who they added as Mookie Cooper comes in. And Gabe, I'm sure you've seen film on him. He was at Ohio State, kid out of St. Louis, decides to come back to Old Mizzou.
Yeah, he ended up they played at Trinity High School for a while, ended up trying to go to Pattonville because I don't know, he couldn't play at Pattonville, then went to Ohio State and Ohio State, I don't know if you guys noticed in that national semifinal, they appear to have good wide receivers. Yeah. So I don't know that there's any shame in not breaking into the rotation as a true freshman in Columbus. And look, Mookie wanted to get closer to home. I'm sure wanted to get to a place he could be on the football field. This is a big get for Eli Drinkwitz. I know there was some, there were some fans who said, well, once you leave, then then you leave. You don't come back. Well, first of all, that wasn't Eli Drinkwitz. Second of all, there's only one question you ask if a kid wants to come back. Can he help us win? If he can help us win, he's welcome back. If he can't help you win, he's not welcome back. So I think that was big, and not only big in that the player they added, but he is effectively a true freshman next year. He has 5 more years to play for, because it is amazing to me, but still every day we are asked about this eligibility thing. Like last year, you just have to pretend last year didn't happen. The happiest people in America are sports information directors, because they don't really have to update very much information on the online rosters. They just have to go through and add about 15 pounds to the weight of every kid and lie about how tall they are.
Yeah, no doubt. So that was big news. And then it was made official today, leaked a little bit yesterday, but Ryan Walters leaving Mizzou to go join Brett Bielema over at Illinois, the new Illinois head coach. And it's something that Eli Drinkwitz wouldn't block, but I mean, we have to admit this is a pretty significant loss.
It's unconventional. I think that's probably it, because you leave a team that's seen to be on the rise in a conference, in the Power 5 conference, for the same job at a program that's completely rebuilding at Illinois and that has not had anywhere near the recent success that Missouri has had. But when you consider all the circumstances here, and I never got the sense there was any animosity or resentment between Eli Drinkwitz and Ryan Walters. They both spoke pretty fondly of each other. But when you're that holdover coach, and then your side of the ball doesn't play very well, it gets awkward. And I think it can get awkward. And to prevent it from getting more awkward, the easiest thing to do is take the next best job that you get. And then it's a clean slate and it's a fresh start. And we haven't, as of today, we haven't heard Ryan say any of that, but you can read between the lines, and just knowing how these situations work. I think that's what happened here. So I think we all like Ryan. I think he did a pretty good job there. It's hard to kind of measure what he did this year because of COVID to some degree, but I don't get the sense, and I'm sure Gabe's gotten the same sense, that Missouri is like really worried about this. I think they'll go out and hire somebody else and just kind of move along. Drinkwitz is an offensive guy. This is he'll find somebody to run his defense, and they'll just keep on building.
And Gabe, I'm going to sort of steal something you said. If a guy's making $900,000 for 1 year and gets a 3-year contract for $700,000, well, that's a lot more money in the long run. So he's got job security.
Yeah, we don't know what Ryan's getting paid, but over 3 years, which I assume the contract will be, most coordinator contracts are, it's going to be more than he knew he was going to make here, because I think all he knew he was going to get was 1 year here. I was actually honestly a little bit surprised he stayed last year. And I think that probably speaks to what the job market was for him at this time last year. But look, this is a place that, and I know Missouri fans will make jokes about Brett Bielema. I think it was a decent hire for Illinois. Arkansas would kill for Brett Bielema's time at Arkansas to be where they are right now. So he wasn't as bad, I think, as people thought. And he can go work under a defensive coach, and I would imagine Ryan's a head coach somewhere by the end of that contract at Illinois. That's the goal. He doesn't risk maybe Missouri, like Dave was saying, not being as good and him being kind of the fall guy. Because look, Eli Drinkwitz's job isn't at stake next year. So we know whose job would be at stake if Missouri wasn't great. So I think it's to quote Michael Scott, it's a win-win-win. Everybody won. Illinois gets to say, hey, we stole a Missouri guy, and Missouri fans will get mad and say, no, you didn't. But if the situation was reversed, Missouri fans would say the exact same thing, right? Hey, we stole Javon Pickett from Illinois. We stole this guy or that guy. That's what you do. You promote what makes you look good.
And now you get to make a defensive coordinator big board, which is fantastic.
Well, it required a lot of Googling, because I'm going to be honest, I don't know a whole lot of college football assistant coaches, right? I know the guys who are going to be head coaches or already are head coaches, but I don't know a ton about coordinators, especially. And the coordinators I do know are either really good or already have Power 5 jobs. I don't have to put Brent Venables on a hot board, right? I got to go find somebody else. So it took a little research. And I think I was actually texting Dave about this the other day too, just and this is probably a little too inside baseball for people watching, but this year, the only Missouri assistant coach that I've met in person more than twice just left. So it's really hard to have developed any relationships with anybody that might give you some idea what's going on in this. So I've thrown some names out there, and I want to be clear. It is nothing more than me looking around and saying, I don't know, these are some guys that would make sense to me.
And there's two things, Dave. One, we'll have to see if any more defensive coaches go with Coach Walters. And then the other thing is, will they promote somebody from within? I don't know if there's too many candidates for that.
I doubt anyone would go with him. It's unconventional enough for a coordinator to leave for another coordinator job. Then it'd be more so for like a D-line coach to go to another D-line job. And I don't think anybody on that staff is really under a whole lot of pressure, to move on necessarily. If there is an internal candidate, I would think it would be David Gibbs, the cornerbacks coach, just because he's been a Power 5 coordinator at a few different places, including in the SEC at Auburn a long time ago. And he was the guy that was the next man up when Ryan was in contact tracing and couldn't coach for 2 weeks, including that game at South Carolina, which Missouri won, and the defense played pretty well. I don't know if that factors into his credentials, but if you want to go in-house, and that was always Gary Pinkel's move, was to go in-house first, then there's an option there. If not, that's not to say they can't give it to Brick Haley or Charlie Harbison or DJ Smith. Who knows? But I think he would be the most logical in-house candidate. But if you're Drinkwitz, you don't have to go that route either. Eli has not been coaching very long, just over a decade, but he's coached at like 6 places. So he's been around. He's met a lot of people. He knows people that names we've never heard of necessarily. So we'll see what he comes up with. And
the main point here is, Gabe, final thing, he gets to pick his own guy now. And that's what he wants to do.
And what Dave was talking about early, I mean, we both have covered Missouri long enough that we were here early in Gary Pinkel's time. And if you haven't been around college staffs, you might not understand. There's some junior high hallway type stuff to these things. I mean, it took Andy Hill a while to feel like he was kind of in that same group with all the guys that came from Toledo. He eventually got there, but Andy Hill's also a legend at Missouri, which is something Ryan Walters didn't really have. So Ryan Walters was never going to be, quote unquote, in the boys club here. And I don't say that as a bad thing about Walters or about Drinkwitz. It's human nature. It's how it works. And so again, Drinkwitz gets to put his stamp on this program. I do think it's a big hire though, because let's be honest, if we're writing down a list of why did Barry Odom get fired here, it's because he didn't have much to do with the offense, and he hired the wrong guy to run it. I mean, Eli Drinkwitz, I'm not saying he doesn't pay any attention to the defense, but he is the offensive coordinator. Most offensive coordinators are not spending a ton of practice time with the defense during the week. So this is basically an assistant head coach for Drinkwitz, and it is an important hire that he needs to get right.
Yeah, no doubt about it. We'll talk about a little bit more of that in the tweets. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, your tweets. You're watching Tiger Sidelines right here on MC22. Welcome back, everybody. This is Tiger Sidelines on MC22. I'm Bo Bayman, joined remotely by Gabe DeArmond and Dave Matter. Thanks for your tweets. Our first tweet comes from Scott. We're at Tiger Sidelines. He says, quite frankly, who's your pick for the new defensive coordinator?
I mean, I don't know that we're qualified to really have any idea. Like Dave said, Drinkwitz probably has a list, and it's probably not very similar to mine. There are some potential interesting names out there. I mean, you look at some guys that maybe have been fired, like, Kevin Steele, the Auburn DC, doesn't have a job right now. Derek Ansley at Tennessee may not have a job in a few days, may not have a job by the time somebody watches this. I don't know. Chris Ash at Texas. These are guys that have been fired. I personally would go more towards somebody that is a little bit like Drinkwitz, like up and coming. Hey, there's some risk involved. It's probably his first Power 5 job, but I looked at Scott Simons from Liberty and Chad Skaggs from Coastal Carolina. David Reeves at UAB has had a top 10 offense 3 years in a row, basically within a couple of years of the program being shut down, and knows Casey Woods. So I think that's a name to watch, but none of those may be on his list.
Or I think you go out and look for a Ryan Walters, somebody on a Power 5 staff who, maybe has the most sterling reputation right now in the moment. Don't be a prisoner of the moment. Look at the last couple of games, but it just may be ready for a change, because some of these coaches, and I'm not saying this is necessarily true about Ryan, some of these guys are just addicted to moving on to the next shiny object. So not everybody is Gary Pinkel that wants to stay in the same place for 15 years. There's people that want to move all the time, and we've seen it year after year, especially with assistant coaches. So you can find somebody out there who may be more willing to leave and come see what they can do in the SEC than what we might give credit for.
What about this one real quick before we move on? A few people on our site suggested it. Charlie Strong is currently in the Nick Saban rehab program being an analyst. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if he'd take it, but like, he was pretty good as a defensive coordinator.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Guy can recruit. I think he's a name, that helps a little bit. So yeah, I'd consider it. Sure.
There are some people too, Dave, to your point, when you say some people feel like they have to move to the shiny object, they also feel like they have to move because if they're not moving, then they're not desirable because they're just sitting there and people don't want to hire them. And that's kind of what Kramer asked. He said, thought on the departure of Walters from a pretty decent program to one of lesser stature. Well, that's it. It has to do with the contract.
That, and it's a fresh start at Illinois where they just hired somebody who has won big in the Big Ten. There's no reason that Brett Bielema can't have some success at Illinois. I know Missouri fans will look down at that program because in the last 15 years, Missouri's been by far the better program, but they just hired, that's their best hire they've had in a long, long time. They've settled for some other coaches that you look at and you're like, really, Lovie Smith, he's never coached at college or never as a head coach, and some other guys that just didn't cut it. But I think I agree with Gabe. I think it's a good hire. He's a defensive guy, so Ryan won't be the fall guy if things just, don't work right away. Good situation for him. And it's an opportunity. If they win 5 or 6 games this year and their defense is decent, all of a sudden now he's the reason.
And perception is important. Like you always say, you don't want to be the guy that follows the guy, right? Follow somebody who just got fired. Like, yeah. I mean, and we don't have to look very far for this. Yeah. People want to name buildings after Eli Drinkwitz. He went 5-5. Like, he had a good year, but they are in love with this guy. Down in Fayetteville, Arkansas, I said, Barry Odom's name came up for some jobs. I said, they want to build statues of that dude for going 3-7 and giving up like 50 points a game the last 3 weeks. Like, there's some value in that, as opposed to, so with Walters, if they go 4-8 next year, but the defense looks pretty good and they see some fight and they land a couple kids, maybe even out of St. Louis, those fans are going to go, hey, I like this. This is going the right direction.
Yeah, no doubt. Steve tweets in and says, men's hoops off to a pretty good start. They do have trouble shooting the 3 ball. Could this be a case where they played so hard defensively, it hurts their shooting? We'll talk much more after the break about the basketball team. Wanted to say thanks for the tweet, Steve. Don't forget, we're at Tiger Sidelines. We'll talk about basketball, including the meltdown in Mississippi, on Tiger Sidelines when we come back. You're watching us on MC22. Welcome back, everybody. This is Tiger Sidelines on MC22. Gabe DeArmond, Dave Matter, and I'm Bo Bayman. Since we spoke last, 3 Missouri men's basketball games have been played. A crushing defeat by Tennessee, where Tennessee looked like it was going to run away with the SEC when we saw them at Mizzou Arena. To me, a surprising win at Arkansas, a tough place to play. And Missouri, the way they looked at Tennessee, didn't look like they'd have the legs to beat the Hogs. They go out and do it, and then they continue for about 22 minutes at Mississippi State to play good basketball. The final 18 is just absolutely horrible, and this team now is 1-2 with 1-2 in the SEC, 7-2 overall, but with a bad loss against Mississippi State as LSU comes to town.
Well, it's a bad loss because of how it happened. I mean, just losing to Mississippi State on the road isn't a bad loss, but I actually came up with a theory on this one, and it's rare that I've seen a game just flip like that one did. I mean, I've seen 20-point leads blown, but not like that. I mean, that was just almost immediate. And I mean, that game was over with 7 minutes to go. Mississippi State went from down 14 to up 15 in 11 minutes. So I don't know what you guys think about this. Now, you may not have heard that Mississippi State's players were all very tired in that game, I think maybe they all took naps at halftime and they got they woke up, had a little juice cup, maybe some snacks, and they came out and they just had a lot more energy. And Konzo didn't let his guys go to sleep with, carry their blankies out on the floor.
Orange slices. They always work orange slices at halftime. But it was amazing, just the difference between the two halves. And I mean, Missouri's cruising. They played very well in the first half, but it wasn't like, oh my gosh, this is the best we've seen. They were just taking care of business. And then all of a sudden it just went south.
Right. I've had a lot of people ask, like, well, why didn't Konzo make better halftime adjustments at halftime? What is there to adjust?
Yeah.
They were playing as well as they have all year. The defense was great. Mississippi State looked completely disengaged, like they had no interest in playing. You just tell physically. Tillman, he posted up a few times, and the guy guarding him, it was Abdul Ado was just like, I don't want any part of this. Go ahead, score. We're done. They were waving the white flag. And offensively, Missouri just got everything it wanted. Even if they missed a shot and they shot 50%, it was a good look. So one turnover. I mean, if Missouri goes 20 minutes with one turnover, what is there to adjust? But I think that's what's so inexplicable is that they just went from looking that good to as bad as we've seen them in a long time. And it wasn't immediately at halftime either. It took about 3 minutes. So where was the flip? The switch flipped. I don't know. And you got to give Mississippi State credit too. They couldn't miss. Those are contested shots too. Contested pull-up 2-point jumpers, which are like the least efficient shot in basketball. But when you can't miss, it's just your day.
And Gabe, you pointed this out. Mississippi State shot about 70% in the second half. The game was over with 7 minutes left because the guy who's struggling right now for Missouri, really one of two guys, Drew Smith, committed an egregious foul on a three. But Drew Smith has been the guy that has not played well. And you could tell Xavier Pinson, Jeremiah Tillman, when they play well, the team is good. If they had Drew to go with it, it would be unbelievable. And they don't have that.
Yeah, I thought Tillman was good against Mississippi State. I thought Pinson was pretty good. Not great, but career high 8 assists. He ran that offense really nicely in the first half. This is really, and all the focus is on Mitchell Smith and Kobe Brown. And I understand they shouldn't take 7 threes in a game. But the guys who are going to determine how far this team goes are Mark and Drew Smith. And right now, you are getting a net negative out of those two guys. I mean, Drew, he had 12 points or something like that, but that was one of his. He just continues to do things that you say, I don't understand how your fifth-year senior and like the guy that everybody says is your best player, that 3-point foul was one of the worst fouls I've ever seen. And that play to me was the one that ended it. It turned a 3-point game into a 6-point game, and Missouri just panicked at that point. And then Mark Smith, look, I think we're at the point we've seen he'll have a couple games here and there. But for the most part, against high major competition, Mark Smith can't get a clean shot off. I mean, he can't. He's stiff. He's not a super athlete. I know Konzo wants us to believe that he's a driver and he's a spot up shooter. And that's what they need to make him. They need to embrace that. Hey, you be the guy standing over in the corner. Let's not have Kobe Brown and Mitchell Smith standing in the corner trying to take this pass. Let's have Mark Smith standing in the corner trying to take this pass because it plays to his strength and it avoids a weakness of Brown and Mitchell.
Yeah, no doubt about it. He needs to become more of a Matt Lawrence, just catch it and shoot. Dave, they have LSU and then they have Vandy, both home games. LSU, I think they match up pretty well with them. LSU's got some scores. That's the thing. Yeah. And then Vandy, you have to beat Vandy. They could get right in the next two games.
They could, but nothing should surprise anyone if they go out and beat LSU by 15 and then lose to Vanderbilt. I mean, that's just how this team is right now. We can't predict them from game to game, much less even half to half. I mean, the way that Mississippi State game unfolded. There was a point when it looked like they were going to lose to Bradley. I peeked ahead at the schedule and said they could start off 0-4 in league play. I mean, if they play like this, now they're going to be at worst 1-3. If you go 2-2, is that a success? Maybe looking at the schedule before the season, it would have been. But when you get up to like 13 in the rankings, you're 10 in the net, then all of a sudden when you're splitting games during the week, that feels like less of an accomplishment. But I think where this team is right now, 2-2, I think you could live with that. But when there's when they're home games, but then again, home games don't mean anything this year. They really don't. I don't know. Nothing would surprise me at this point with this team. I mean, I think they can win. There's not a game on their schedule they can't win. There's not a game on their schedule they can't lose. And we've been saying that for a while with this team.
Yeah, no doubt about it. The women's basketball team has gone 1-2 in their last 3 games. They beat Southern Illinois, then lost to Alabama, lost to Arkansas, and then they've lost a game because of COVID-19. I saw today where South Carolina's women's basketball program had to shut down because of COVID. It seems like, knock on wood, the women's side has really been affected by the pandemic, especially in this early part of the SEC season. And Robin Pinchton's team has been so start, stop. That's the way this season is going to go for them.
I don't know if it says anything, but like, it does seem like women's basketball, volleyball, these programs have had far more trouble playing games than men's basketball and football have. And now I don't know if that's because my guess is honestly, it's because everybody knows how important football and men's basketball are to the university. And they're being told, look, man, we need this to happen. Whereas you lose a volleyball game, like, it's a bummer for the volleyball team, but it's not hurting the athletic department's bottom line in the end. I don't know. I don't have any great theories about it. It's just kind of interesting.
I wonder too, did more male teams test positive over the summer? And
right.
They're more immune at this point. I mean, not that they've had the vaccine or anything like that, but maybe the women's teams did a better job of distancing and all that before the season, and now they're just a little bit more susceptible. I don't know. It's a ridiculous theory that's probably, irresponsible to throw out there, but it does definitely seem like women's teams are having a tougher time with this. Maybe
on the next episode, we can go do a person by person breakdown of that pool party at Lake of the Ozarks and see if we can find, maybe there were maybe the SEC men's basketball team just all hung out down there in the summer.
All the managers did. And they came back and spread it.
The Tigers next travel to Auburn on Sunday and Ole Miss on Thursday, the 14th. And the wrestling team was ranked number 12 to start the season. They go 3-0 at the North Dakota State Quadrangular. They beat North Dakota State. They beat South Dakota State. They beat Oregon State. They beat them all impressively. They're at home in the Hearn Center this weekend against Central Michigan and Wyoming. That'll be on Friday. Alan Hart named the MAC Wrestler of the Week. And so that wrestling is going on. And finally, before we go, yes?
I wanted to ask real quick, in all this talk of how are we going to play football? How are we going to play? How are we having wrestling? I don't good that they are. That's great for them. But how is wrestling happening? That's crazy to me that it's actually going on.
You should see all the cleaning they have to do. And I'm not being a joke or anything. They do tons and tons. Final thing, Alabama, Ohio State, supposed to play for the national championship. Both look good in their semifinal. Who you got? Can the Buckeyes beat Alabama?
If Justin Fields is healthy, I think so. But man, he looks pretty gimpy right now. I just think Alabama has too much firepower. It's hard to go against them, but Florida gave them a game in the SEC championship game. So I think if you can score points, you can test Alabama, and this can be close. But it's hard to go against Saban at this point. Though I was really impressed with Ohio State against Clemson.
Yeah, I think Alabama has too much, especially with Fields. I mean, I thought the crazy thing about that Clemson-Ohio State game is Ryan Day said at halftime, I told him he has to go out and play in the second half, and I didn't hear anybody say anything about it. All right, well, that's cool.
Well, looks like he's playing then. All right. All right, we'll see what happens.
I mean, I know, you have 7 ribs just floating in your stomach, but dude, we need you here.
Tell yourself you're good. We're right. Good. We need you. All right. Thanks, Gabe. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Brian and Matt behind the scenes. We'll see you next week on Tiger Sidelines right here on MC22.